Amaka was only 12 when her parents made the hardest decision of their lives. Their small village in eastern Nigeria had little to offer. Scarce food, no running water, and a daily struggle to survive. Amaka's father, Nnamdi, was a subsistence farmer, eking out a living from parched soil. Her mother, Ngozi, worked tirelessly selling akara at the village square, her fingers burned from the hot oil. Despite their sacrifices, it wasn't enough. School fees remained unpaid, and the family often went to bed hungry. So when a distant relative, Auntie Bisi, visited from Lagos with promises of a brighter future for Amaka, it felt like a prayer answered. "She will go to school," Auntie Bisi had said, her voice dripping with kindness. "I'll treat her like my own daughter." Lagos is full of opportunities. Nnamdi hesitated. He loved his daughter fiercely. She was his sunshine, with her big curious eyes and infectious laughter. But what future could he offer her here? Ngozi cried for days, clutching Amaka tightly before finally agreeing. The morning Amaka left, the entire family gathered to pray. Nnamdi placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Be a good girl. Make us proud." Amaka, clutching a small bag containing her few belongings, promised she would. The first thing Amaka noticed about Lagos was the noise. Cars honked incessantly and people shouted on the streets. She had never seen such chaos, nor such tall buildings. Auntie Bisi's house, however, was a stark contrast. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but clean and filled with the scent of spices. "Welcome, my dear," Auntie Bisi said. "This will be your home now." Amaka felt a glimmer of hope, but that hope dimmed quickly. Auntie Bisi handed her a broom the very next morning. "You will clean the house, wash the clothes, and cook. School will come later," she said with a dismissive wave. Amaka's heart sank. She had dreamed of sitting in a classroom, of learning to read and write, of one day becoming a teacher. But now her days were filled with endless chores. It didn't take long for Auntie Bisi's true nature to emerge. She was quick to anger and harsh with her words. If Amaka made a mistake, even a small one, it resulted in slaps or scalding rebukes. "You're useless," Auntie Bisi screamed one day when Amaka accidentally burned the rice. "Your parents sent you here to be my burden?" Amaka cried herself to sleep that night. But her tears didn't stop the work, nor did they stop Auntie Bisi's cruelty. It was Uncle Femi, Auntie Bisi's husband, who truly turned her world upside down. At first he seemed kind. He brought her sweets and smiled warmly. But soon his gestures became uncomfortable. One evening, as Amaka was washing dishes, he entered the kitchen and stood too close. His hand brushed her shoulder, lingering too long. "Good girl," he murmured, his voice low and unsettling. Uncle Femi, who was wearing a transparent nightdress, which showed all his body including his manhood, stood at the fireplace in the kitchen, more than he should, staring at Amaka's body, asked her to get up and look at him. With fear on her face, Amaka looked up. Uncle Femi said, "Why are you afraid?" She replied, "Nothing." Uncle Femi came a little closer. Fears overwhelmed this little girl. He told her, "Do you know you are a grown woman and you're mature enough to experience what mature women experience?" Amaka's eyes welled with tears, so many things running through her thoughts and mind. Uncle Femi asked her to touch him over there, making sure she was rubbing her hands properly. Amaka said no. He threatened her with his face, furious. She was scared and had no choice then to obey as she rubbed her hands on him. Uncle Femi started touching her body from her chest to her lower back, putting his hands where he shouldn't. As he went forward, she would try to scream and cry for him to stop, but he wouldn't, not until he carried her up onto the kitchen table and did the unforgettable. She cried and begged for him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. Using the olive cooking oil as lubricant, after he achieved what he wanted, he went out and got her a pat. She was in so much pain, crying all day, wishing her mother was there to help her. Later that day, she fell sick. Despite that, Auntie Bisi didn't care. Inside, she woke her up from sleep with a cup of water, splashing it on her face. "Come, will you wake up, you useless girl?" With Uncle Femi watching and not doing anything to help. Uncle Femi's visits became frequent. He would corner her when Auntie Bisi was out, whispering vile things and touching her in ways that made her skin crawl. She would often say, "Uncle, this is painful. It's paining me. Please stop." But he wouldn't listen and continued with his evil act. Amaka tried to avoid him, but the small house offered no refuge. Farewell to half-life was even more true than before. One night she mustered the courage to tell Auntie Bisi, "Auntie, Uncle Femi, he does things to me. Bad things." Auntie Bisi's reaction was swift and brutal. She slapped Amaka across the face. "How dare you lie about my husband? You ungrateful wretch!" Amaka learned then that no one would protect her. It was the neighbor, Mama Tunde, who first noticed the bruises. She often saw Amaka fetching water at dawn, her small frame weighed down by the heavy bucket. One morning she stopped Amaka. "My child, what happened to your arm?" she asked, pointing to a fresh bruise. Amaka shook her head, her lips trembling. "It's nothing, Mama." But Mama Tunde wasn't convinced. She began watching closely, piecing together the signs, the bruises, the thinness of Amaka's frame, the sadness in her eyes. Amaka's life was a cycle of pain and fear, but Mama Tunde's kindness gave her a glimmer of hope. One day, unable to hold it in any longer, she broke down. "Mama, please help me," she sobbed. "I can't take it anymore." Mama Tunde listened in horror as Amaka poured out her story. Tears streamed down her face as she vowed, "I will not let this continue. You deserve better, my child." Mama Tunde could barely sleep that night. Amaka's words echoed in her mind, each revelation like a knife to her heart. The thought of such a young girl enduring unspeakable pain in silence filled her with rage. The next morning, she made up her mind. She would fight for Amaka, no matter the cost. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. In her experience, people like Auntie Bisi were quick to deny and even quicker to retaliate. Mama Tunde's first step was to contact a women's advocacy group she had heard about in Lagos. The organization, known for protecting children in abusive situations, listened attentively as she relayed Amaka's story. "We'll send someone to investigate," they assured her. Mama Tunde also approached the local police, but their response was less encouraging. "This is a family matter," one officer said dismissively. "It's better not to interfere." Frustrated but undeterred, Mama Tunde pressed on. She wasn't about to let bureaucracy stand in the way of justice. That evening, Mama Tunde decided to confront Auntie Bisi directly. She knocked on the door with firm determination. When Auntie Bisi opened the door, her face hardened. "What do you want?" she asked coldly. "I need to talk to you about Amaka," Mama Tunde said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Auntie Bisi scoffed. "What about her? She's a lazy, ungrateful girl. She's a child," Mama Tunde shot back. "And I know what's been happening in this house. You have no right to treat her this way." The argument escalated quickly. Auntie Bisi denied everything, her voice rising with every word. But when Mama Tunde mentioned Uncle Femi's abuse, her face turned pale. "You don't know what you're talking about," Auntie Bisi hissed. "Get out of my house." As soon as Uncle Femi walked through the door that evening, Auntie Bisi slammed it shut behind him. Her face was taut with anger, and her voice came out sharp and accusing. "Femi, what have you done?" she demanded. "Do you know that woman next door came here saying you've been touching that girl, Amaka, a child for God's sake?" Not just touching, but also doing the unthinkable. Uncle Femi froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he took in her fury. "What nonsense are you talking about?" he snapped, dropping his bag. "Who told you such lies? Don't you dare call it lies, Femi," Auntie Bisi shouted, stepping closer to him. "Aka herself told that nosy neighbor everything. She said you've been sneaking into her room at night. Even the kitchen table was the first time. Do you think I wouldn't find out?" Uncle Femi's expression darkened. and his voice turned cold. "So, you believe the words of a stupid little girl over your own husband? Are you mad, Bisi? Have you lost your senses?" He raised his hand to point at her, his voice rising. "You're embarrassing me with this nonsense. This is my house, and I won't tolerate this kind of disrespect." "You're disgusting, Femi," Auntie Bisi fired back, her voice cracking. "How could you do something so evil to a child that we were supposed to protect?" Her words seemed to ignite a dangerous spark in him. "You're calling me evil," he roared, advancing toward her. "After everything I've done for you, you don't even have proof. You're letting outsiders poison your mind against me. You're nothing but ungrateful." His face twisted with fury, and his hands clenched into fists. When Auntie Bisi didn't back down, he lost all control. Without warning, he grabbed a belt from the chair nearby and swung it at her. "You dare to accuse me? You dare to shame me in my own house?" he shouted as the belt lashed against her arm. She screamed and tried to dodge, but he grabbed a wire lying on the floor and continued to beat her. Each strike was accompanied by venomous words. "You think you can question me? I'm the head of this house," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the small room. Crying and begging him to stop, Auntie Bisi fell to the floor, her arms raised in a futile attempt to shield herself. "Femi, please, stop," she sobbed. But his anger didn't wane. He threw the wire aside and pointed a trembling finger at her. "If I ever hear you speak about this again, you'll regret it more than you do now," he spat, breathing heavily. He stormed out of the room, leaving her trembling and bruised on the cold floor, her mind reeling from both the physical pain and the horrifying truth she had uncovered about the man she married. Uncle Femi's anger toward Amaka simmered into something far more sinister after his confrontation with Auntie Bisi. Late that night, when the house was silent, he crept into Amaka's small, dimly lit room. She was curled up on the thin mattress, her face buried in the pillow, clutching it tightly. Without a word, he yanked the pillow from her grip and dragged her roughly by the arm. "You think you can ruin me, huh?" he hissed, his voice low but dripping with menace. "I feed you, clothe you, and this is how you repay me? You think anyone will believe you over me?" Amaka trembled, her tear-streaked face filled with terror, unable to utter a word. He forced her to kneel on the cold floor, glaring down at her like a predator with its prey. "From now on, you will do exactly what I say, or you'll wish you never came to this house," he growled, his grip tightening on her arm. Aka winced in pain, her small frame shaking violently as he berated her. He struck her across the face, a sharp slap that sent her reeling to the floor. As she struggled to get up, he grabbed her hair, pulling her up forcefully. "If you ever speak to anyone about what happens here, I'll make sure no one finds you. Do you hear me?" he snarled, his face mere inches from hers. When she nodded weakly, too frightened to respond verbally, he shoved her back onto the mattress. But he wasn't done. That night he crossed every line imaginable, his actions leaving Amaka broken and scarred in ways words could never fully describe. The room became a prison of pain and despair for her, her cries swallowed by the darkness and the oppressive silence of the house. When it was finally over, he stood over her, his expression devoid of remorse. "Remember," he whispered coldly, "you brought this on yourself. No one will believe you." And with that he left, leaving Amaka to curl into herself, sobbing quietly, her body and soul shattered. The morning light crept through the small window of the house, casting long shadows that seemed to reflect the darkness lurking inside. Amaka woke up, her body stiff from the horrors of the night before. Every movement caused her to wince, the pain reminding her of what had happened at the hands of the man who should have protected her. But as the house grew still, she knew that nothing was ever going to be the same again. She could hear Auntie Bisi in the kitchen, clanging pots and pans with a kind of force that made Amaka's stomach tighten. Bisi wasn't really her aunt, just a woman her parents had entrusted her to, hoping for a better life. But Bisi had never been a mother figure, never a protector. The woman was only interested in her own survival, her own comfort. As Amaka slowly dragged herself out of bed, her body aching from the physical punishment Uncle Femi had dealt her the night before, she knew Bisi's only concern would be whether or not she could keep up the pretense of a happy home. Amaka shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes swollen from crying, her heart heavy with dread. Bisi didn't even glance at her as she stirred something in the pot. "Get the broom and sweep the compound," she ordered, her voice cold and distant. She didn't care about Amaka's pain, about her heartache. All she cared about was keeping the house clean and herself free from trouble. It was as if nothing had happened the night before, nothing at all. Amaka wanted to scream, to collapse into a heap and tell Bisi everything, but she knew better. She had learned over the past weeks that Bisi only cared for herself. When she had confronted Femi about what happened, Bisi had been furious, not because of what her husband had done to Amaka, but because it threatened to expose the secrets she had spent years hiding. She had been beaten just as brutally as Amaka for speaking out, her own body now a map of bruises and shame. Yet, Bisi's anger was not at the injustice, but at the fact that her life was now at risk of being ruined by the very man she had chosen to stay with. "I said sweep the compound," Bisi repeated, her voice more forceful now. She turned her back on Amaka, ignoring her silent sobs as she wiped away the evidence of her own tears from the previous night. She didn't care about Amaka's broken spirit or her battered body, only that the house appeared in order, that everything looked like it always had before. Amaka stumbled toward the broom, her hands shaking. She had never been treated this way before. The work, the constant demands, the coldness, it was all too much. She had hoped for some kind of relief, for someone to take her side, but it seemed the world had turned its back on her. "Make sure you do the laundry after that," Bisi continued, her voice a monotone. "And I don't want to hear any complaints about the work. If you're not strong enough to handle it, maybe you should go back to your parents." With a constant complaint about the work, Bisi continued her orders. As the day stretched on, the tasks kept piling up. Amaka worked without rest, sweeping the compound, washing clothes by hand, scrubbing the floor. Her arms ached, her back screamed for mercy, but there was no one to show her kindness. Bisi didn't care about the pain in her eyes, didn't care about the tears she wiped away in silence as she worked. She only cared about her own comfort, her own reputation. When Uncle Femi came home, he barely glanced at Amaka. His eyes narrowed with contempt. His silence was a constant reminder of his cruelty, his disregard for her pain. Bisi too said nothing. There were no apologies, no remorse. The house was quiet, as if everything that had happened the night before was a forgotten dream. But Amaka knew better. The bruises on her body would never fade, not as long as she was trapped in this house, surrounded by people who cared only for themselves. She knew that she had to endure, had to survive, even if it meant losing pieces of herself along the way. And Auntie Bisi? She was no savior. She was a woman who saw Amaka as nothing more than a tool, someone to clean her house and take care of her needs, all while hiding the truth about the man who had caused so much harm. There was no love, no compassion, just a cold, calculating woman who would stop at nothing to protect her own interests. Amaka's heart shattered just a little more every day, and though her body was bruised and battered, it was her spirit that was truly being broken. Bisi's body was a map of bruises, each one a silent testament to the violent storm that had erupted in the dark hours of the night. Her face, once full of pride and defiance, now bore the weight of pain. Her lips swollen, a dark bruise creeping under her left eye, and her jaw sore from where Femi's fists had struck. Her arms were covered in purple and blue marks, remnants of the wire and belt that had been used to beat her into submission. She tried to hide it all, wearing long sleeves and a scarf to cover the evidence of her suffering. But each step she took reminded her of the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her. It was as if the bruises were a constant companion, a reminder that her life was not her own, that she was trapped in a cycle of fear and submission. Despite the physical pain, what hurt most was the shame. the knowledge that she had stayed, that she had allowed herself to be broken. The morning light was a cruel mockery of the night's brutality. Amaka moved through the house like a ghost, her body a map of last night's horrors, her spirit as heavy as the chores she was forced to perform. Auntie Bisi, her face a tapestry of her own recent beating, stood in the kitchen, her voice cold and distant. "Get the broom, sweep the compound," she commanded, not even glancing at Amaka. Amaka picked up the broom, her hands trembling. As she swept the compound, each stroke of the broom felt like another layer of her spirit being worn away. Mama Tunde's voice cut through the morning silence. "Amaka, come help me with my water bucket." Her tone was casual, but her eyes spoke of urgency. Auntie Bisi, eager to keep up appearances, nodded sharply. "Go help her, quickly now." Outside, away from prying eyes, Mama Chunda whispered to Amaka with urgency. "They're coming, child. The people who can help you. Stay strong." Amaka's voice quavered. "What if they don't believe me, Mama?" "They will, my child. They have to," Mama Tunde assured, her hand squeezing Amaka's in a gesture of silent support. Back inside, the tension was like a physical presence. Uncle Femi returned, his eyes locking onto Amaka with a predatory gleam. He waited until Bisi was out of earshot before cornering Amaka in the kitchen. His breath was hot against her ear as he whispered threats. "You think you can speak out? No one will believe you." The knock at the door was like a gunshot, shattering the fragile peace. Two women from the advocacy group entered, their presence filling the room with a new kind of tension. "Good afternoon," one of them said, her voice calm but authoritative. "We're from the Child Protection NGO. We've received some concerning reports." Auntie Bisi, hastily composing herself, offered, "Would you like some tea?" Her voice was overly sweet, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured towards the kitchen. "No, thank you. We're here to talk about Amaka," the other investigator replied, her gaze not missing the tension in the room. Femi tried to interject with a forced laugh. "Oh, Amaka, she's just a child with a wild imagination. Isn't that right, Amaka?" Maka, her heart pounding, found her voice. "No, Uncle Femi does bad things to me. Auntie Bisi knows, but she doesn't stop him." The investigators exchanged a knowing look. "Can we speak with you alone, Amaka?" In the privacy of another room, Amaka showed them her bruises, her voice shaking as she recounted her ordeal. "He comes to my room at night. He hurts me. And Auntie Bisi, she only cares about her house being clean." One of the investigators took meticulous notes, her face hardening with each word. "We need to document this. Do you feel safe here?" Amaka shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I want to go home, but I can't go back like this." Back in the main room, confrontation loomed. Femi's charm had turned to rage. "You're lying, you ungrateful girl," he shouted, lunging towards Amaka. But the investigators were ready. They stepped in front of Amaka. "Back off, sir," one of them commanded firmly. The police, alerted earlier, burst through the door. "Step back, sir," an officer commanded, restraining Femi. As Femi was led away, his threats a low growl. "You'll regret this, all of you," Auntie Bisi grumbled. Her voice, now devoid of its earlier coldness, broke as she confessed, "I was once like her. I thought I could protect her." Amaka watched, her emotions a tangle of pity, anger, and relief. She was free, but the scars were deep. The healing would be long. That evening, at the safe house, Amaka lay in bed, her body aching but her mind clear. The NGO worker, Miss Adatola, handed her a phone. "We managed to contact your parents. They're worried sick about you." Amaka's heart leapt. The phone felt heavy in her hand, a lifeline back to her past life, her family. She dialed, her hands shaking. The line crackled, then a familiar voice came through. "Amaka, oh, my child, is it really you?" "Mama!" The sound of her mother's voice like a balm to her wounded soul. "Amaka, we've been so worried. Are you okay? Where are you?" Ngozi's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm safe now, Mama. I'm with people who can help me, Amaka managed between sobs. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry I couldn't make you proud. Shh, my child. No apologies. Turi's voice trembled. We thought you were safe. We trusted Bisi. We are so sorry, Amaka. Nnamdi's voice came through. Amaka, my sunshine, we'll come for you. We'll get you back home. Amaka felt the weight of her pain lessen with each word from her parents. I don't know if I can come back to the village, Papa. I'm different now. We'll make it work, Amaka, Nnamdi assured, his voice breaking. We'll find a way. We'll be with you every step, even if it's just over the phone for now. The conversation was a mix of tears, promises, and plans. They talked about her recovery, about therapy, about how they would support her from afar until they could be together again. Amaka shared her fears, her loneliness, and her longing for home. We'll get you the help you need, Amaka, Ngozi promised, and we'll visit you as soon as we can arrange it. The call ended with Amaka feeling a little less alone. She knew the road ahead would be long, but now she had her parents' love to light her way. She looked out of the window at the stars, the same ones she saw in her village, now a symbol of hope rather than a reminder of what was lost. For now, she was safe, and that was enough to hold on to as she drifted into a sleep, free from fear, for the first time in months. After the call ended, Ngozi's hands trembled as she placed the phone on the table. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Nnamdi. She's just a child, she whispered, her voice cracking with pain. Only 12. Join me next time for part 2 of this captivating story. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Before you go, help me grow this community. Hit that like button for more thrilling content, subscribe for new uploads, comment below with your theories and reactions, share with friends and family who love a good story. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being an amazing part of this journey.